today's show, we have the amazing Rupal Patel, who, as I've discovered, is the world's biggest owner of invisible books, as you can see on the shelves behind her. You mainly read invisible books, but you have tonight. You have brought some of your visible books for us to talk about. We may actually explain that she hasn't really got any books. For anybody who's like, Asterix, this isn't really true. This is a joke.
Yes.
So, apart from the invisible books, can you describe like who you are and what kind of books you've written and what the theme is behind the books that you picked for tonight?
Okay, so I'm Rupal Patel. I am, who I am. It's a very existential question, Tim, but basically I am a former CIA officer turned serial business owner and founder and coach and mentor to other leaders, as well as what I've been referred to as a super strategist for organizations that just need a bit of help shaking things up and get moving beyond and growing above business as usual. And I recently wrote this book, From CIA to CEO, which we can chat about later. I think we're going to get to later.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I guess the theme of my books that I picked for tonight and the theme of the books that I generally just read is there is no theme, actually. I think the world is an amazing place, and there's so many interesting things about history, about politics, about science, and then also the fiction that I read books that are recommended to me or books that I see in a bookshop that somehow spark my interest. And I am that person who will walk into a Waterstones or a Barnes and Noble and leave about anywhere from $50 to $100 in pounds. Yeah, I know. Cool. So, I have quite a varied and, I guess sort of non-committal types, approach to the types of books I read.
So you have an eclectic mix, I think is what they
Sure. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Right. So I'm going to show off my new show graphic in a second. So your first book is A Savage War of Peace, Algeria, 1954 to 1962 by Alistair Horne. So why did you pick this book?
It was one of those purchases, and I think it was maybe even a Books A Million, I can't remember, where I was in the bookshop and I picked it up, and it was just so compelling because, one, as an American, the Algerian War never came up at any point in my schooling. And, perhaps in Europe, because of the French history of colonialism and just sort of closer proximity, it is a bit more relevant. But for me, I was like, what? There was a civil war in Algeria, and I mean, sort of the ferocity with which it was fought, and again, sort of in my at the time naive American view of the French, which was basically all just stereotypes, right, of how refined and whatever it was. I mean, the real savagery and colonialism in general is savage, but it was a total wake up call on so many levels. But also what it showed me is that, we like to think of history, as something past. But, this war, the Algerian War, it ended in 1962, right? Many of us are alive now. I mean, I wasn't born then, but many people are still alive who went through these things. And it's still very real. And so for people to be like, oh, well, I don't understand why, people over there are so angry about people over here and about this, that, and the other thing, things are relevant and are really, really real for so many people because they've lived this history. And so it's important that we aren't naive about how recent a lot of these things are and how deep some of them can go, because it still has a real impact on reality today. And so a lot of what's happening, for example, in Paris and in France, with the tensions there with the Algerian population and the native French population, et cetera, it makes sense, right? All of a sudden you read a book like this and you're like, okay, well, now it all the pieces are falling together. It's not to make an excuse. It's not to say, oh, well, all former colonies are constantly burdened by this history, but it has real resonance even now.
Yeah. I mean, I think even in the UK, I think 99% of people would have no idea there was a big war in Algeria from 1954 to 1960, at least the people who weren't around then.
Yeah.
So what made you pick out that book when you were Waterstones or Barnes and Noble or wherever?
Yeah, I think it was just, I mean, I found, well, first of all, the title is so compelling, right? A Savage War of Peace. And that initially grabbed my eye. And then again, sort of the blurb on the back, it sort of talks about how this war lasted, for 8 years, and it brought down 6 French governments and led to the collapse of the Fourth Republic. I mean, the impact, it was sort of like, holy shit, how did I not know about this? Yeah. And so it really just grabbed me. I mean, it's a thick book, right? And it's got like sort of biblical print. So it's teeny, but it was one of those things where I was like, well, now that I have heard of this, just by looking at this book, there's no way I can not read it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go on to the next book. So keeping on a European theme, now we've got Churchill's Wizards by Nicholas Rankin.
Yes.
So why did you pick this book?
So I first came across this book when I was at the CIA, and we have this amazing library because, obviously learning and knowledge and expertise is a big part of our work. And this was one of the books that was in the library. And I thought, again, read the blurb about how, during World War II, a lot of the operations that Churchill either spearheaded or approved, or just, again, the Churchill's Wizards refers to the intelligence services during World War II and all of the incredible subterfuge and espionage and the operations that took place as part of that war effort. And for 2 reasons. One, I was in that world, so it was always intriguing to me to read about it. But 2, World War II is one of those, for me, is a war that has always interested me ever since I was a little child. And, I've always read books about World War II, whether they were historical or fictional. And so the combination of the espionage plus, the atmosphere around World War II really grabbed me. And then you start reading it and you think, oh my God. So now, what was that movie that just came out? Operation Mincemeat.
Yeah.
And it popularizes stories and operations that took place in World War II. And so now everybody's all excited and appreciates it. But like the sheer genius of some of the things that they did to trick the Germans, to get information, to decipher ciphers. And I mean, they're called wizards for a reason.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll come on to what you did in the CIA later. It all sounds very cool, but it's like you say, well, I had a 15-year admin job in the typing corps.
Just filing. I was just filing.
Just filing. Well, that was the sitting. Then you're in the evenings, you're out secretly going around blowing things up. So, like, again, it's like, well, let's say this is an Amazon Live show. So when you bought this book on Amazon, what was the thing that made you pick it out? Was it the blurb or the cover? What was the thing that, or was it just something you're interested in?
Well, it was the title. So again, Churchill was a man of many flaws, especially sort of when we think about his place and his views on colonialism and all that kind of stuff. Having said that, in the context of World War II, he was the leader that the world needed, that the UK needed, and that the time needed. And so again, it was that the title was like, oh, Churchill's Wizards, what's that all about? And then, again, finding out that it was about spies and the operations, it was like, well, yeah, tick, tick, tick. This is, how can this be boring, right? So, and also it was also recommended to me by a friend. And so I just thought, okay, well, it's got somebody whose opinion I respect suggesting it, and then when you pick it up and you read it and you read the blurb and the title, you just think, well, yeah, this is a no-brainer. It's thick. Again, I sometimes gravitate towards really thick books, but it's worth every second you take to read it or listen to it. Right. Oh yeah.
And this book is The Three Emperors by Miranda Carter. So why this book then?
So similarly, again, pick caught my eye. I mean, it's quite a weighty thing, right? So there's no way you can pass this book and not notice it. And actually, again, it was the title, less the cover, but it's 3 cousins, 3 empires, and the road to World War I. So I had no idea that Nicholas of Russia, George of I guess the British Empire, and then Wilhelm of Germany were cousins. Queen Victoria was their grandmother. And I think Nicholas actually ended up marrying into the family, so he wasn't directly related, but they were all cousins, so blood related. And these 3 men, the leaders of 3 of the greatest empires at the time, the personal relationship that and the biggest takeaway I took from reading this was Kaiser Wilhelm had a bit of a chip on his shoulder and a feeling of being rejected by the British family, by the British royal family, and all of this stuff, and so that in many ways led almost inevitably to World War I, and this is a very superficial sort of distillation of the bigger picture, but there's a lot of I'm going to prove myself and show my British cousins that I am a real leader, I'm a real emperor, I can sort of compete with, their sort of the grandeur and the power that they project. But the fact that they were all related and still ended up going to war against each other is just, I thought, gosh, this is better than fiction, right? Like,
yeah.
And also that aha thing of like, oh my God, how did I not know? How is it not more widely known? Maybe it is again here, but I had no idea that these three were united by blood. And as you start learning more about royal families in general, you realize, Jesus Christ, they're so intertwined, and everyone's somehow related to everyone, right? And someone's got, everybody, all royal families somehow have some German connection, some Swedish connection, etc. But it was that the three of them were blood relations and still ended up going to war on an epic scale. I mean, World War I, again, as we all know, was just the first of its kind and the worst of its kind in so many ways. So the fact that it was family against family, I mean, that's, again, it's sort of biblical, right? How can you not read that book?
Oh, yeah. I've read quite a few books on the First World War because there was a whole anniversary 2014 to 18. And it's one of those things that looks really straightforward and a bit boring, people in trenches and all the rest of it. But when you read books about it and you get more and more into it, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so many. I read some book was talking about the role of the Serbian royal family. And
Well, of course.
It's bizarre how complicated it was, and still people argue about what caused it now. So that's pretty amazing, really. Okay. And so first in. And there is a subtitle, but for some reason I cut it off by Gary Schroen.
So this is, again, gosh, I guess there is a bit of a theme to the books I've chosen today. There's a lot of war. So first in is the account of the first CIA team that went into Afghanistan. I think it's 5 or 7 men who were the ones who were laying all the groundwork for everything that came after, the military operations, the intelligence operations, everything. And again, I was working at the CIA at the time, and it was one of those books that the history was so recent, right? It was, sort of 9/11, post 9/11 when they went in. And I thought, oh my gosh, I need to read about what we as an organization did, and also these, 5, 7, I think maybe it was 7 sort of specific individuals, how such a small group of people could have such an outsized responsibility and also outsized impact on sort of the initial war effort anyway. So I mean, it was definitely a page turner. It's also really brilliantly written. I mean, all of these books are brilliantly written, but Gary Schroen does a real service to the service of the men, and it was all men who went in those early days when things were so uncertain, were so chaotic in Afghanistan in particular, and just the way they were able to steer things and do things is, I mean, it's nothing short of incredible.
So I'm guessing this appealed because it was kind of almost like a work-based thing that.
It was that, and also again, it was so recent, right? So I, sort of that's based on those early first few days after 9/11. After we went into, or before, I guess we went in with force into Afghanistan, and I just thought, wow, I need to understand not just the role of this in our very modern history, the war on terror and everything that entailed, but also again as an organization and as an agency, what did we do? What can we do?
Yeah. So I'm not going off a slight tangent.
That's all right.
A little bit of time, but do you think you've obviously probably more likely when you're in the CIA, but do you think that you've learned lessons from reading about history that you've been able to apply to the modern day, either in your own life or in your previous work?
I think just that it sounds a bit cliche, but everything is connected. Everything is connected. No matter how far away things seem, no matter how over there we can sort of mentally compartmentalize what's happening, everything affects everything. So what's happening in Yemen now, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Canada, it all matters no matter where you live. And it matters in different ways. It might matter in small ways or in big ways. But there is no way you can read anything about any point in history and not take that lesson away. And so it's a reminder of our, and maybe even more so now when everything is so interconnected, economies and movements of people and goods and technology and all of this stuff, that we can't live in bubbles anymore. Here, so I live in the UK now, and we literally live on an island, but we sure as hell can't act that way, and everything, again, no matter how far away it seems, at some point we'll find a way to come come knocking on your door.
Okay. Right. This next book's going to be a challenge for me to pronounce the author's surname. I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
So, Imperial Life in the Emerald City by Rajiv Chandrasekaran. Is that
Sekaran,
right?
Yeah. So this book was, again, while I was still at the agency, and during my time there, our efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan were huge parts of what the focus was on, and this is all about the way the U.S. and I would say some of the other coalition forces in Iraq, what their reality, what part of the reality was like. So he focuses on basically the military forces in and around Baghdad, and just some of what I love. So he's a journalist, and I think he writes for the Post, I think the Washington Post, if I'm not mistaken. And his I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but his telling of it and what he saw and what he shares is really damning. And what made me really proud about the fact that a book like this can be published in America was that it wasn't glossing over. It didn't, sort of label us as these saviors and give, this big, beautiful golden halo to everything we were doing there. I mean, he pointed to some of the real problems with the war effort and how it was being executed, and some of the disgusting behavior that became popular, sort of in the media anyway, popularly known, about just the way the military and some of the others, not just the military, were abusing the chaos and manipulating things and exploiting things. And so he talks about imperial life, because in the book he very vividly describes how some of these military units and others, and not just military, but diplomatic units and intelligence units, et cetera, took over palaces and were literally sort of living an imperial life with a war going on around them. And so, again, it's sort of compelling reading because you want to think much better of one's country and what we're doing and nation building and all of that stuff. But there's always going to be people who try to take advantage of these situations. And I think he did, from my view, and again, I don't know, I never served in Baghdad or in Iraq, so I don't know, from firsthand experience, but I think he did a good job of just showing the other side of war and how there is so much looting and money. And, we talk about a war or a military industrial complex in America. There's a lot of there as we say in America. So it's not uplifting, but it's, I think, important for us to know what people in our own country are doing in our name overseas, because again, it helps bring back the bigger picture of like, well, maybe this is why people don't have just a positive view of America or the UK or whatever it is, right? So it's important to have these reality checks so that we can keep ourselves honest, again, about what we do when we're operating overseas. And I think all countries operate in their own self-interest, but there's self-interest and then there's self-interest.
Yeah, I think much of the whole kind of imperial issues over and above. I mean, there's a lot to say. It's all some sort of the Americas an evil empire or the British Empire was an evil thing. But a lot of it was people very remote in whatever place they are, a long way from home, and they do a lot of dodgy stuff that probably isn't condoned by the people at home. They all think they're doing wonderful things, but actually in reality, because it's a long way away, people are a bit more suspect.
Well, you just don't know, right? And I think, look, I still fundamentally believe that I'd rather an American empire than a Russian empire, for example, because with all of our flaws, I still believe that America is the best option for being the policeman of the world, or whatever people refer to us as, because fundamentally we do have the right values. We don't always live them perfectly, but as we've seen over history, at least recent history, even when we're a mess internally, and sometimes despite those contradictions, at least we do generally stand for freedom, for progress, for all of those things that I really, really support. And yes, this is ridiculously ironic to be talking about a couple of days after Roe v. Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court and all of the insanity around that. But I still believe in the promise of America and what we stand for. And I think, again, we're seeing the rise of China, the rise of Russia. And I still think that if there has to be, and I don't know if there does have to be, but if there has to be a dominant global power, I'd much rather it be America than China or Russia.
Okay, let's before we get too political.
Yes.
I like talking about politics, but I'm not sure Amazon will like it on the platform. Let me get on to the next.
Ooh, yeah.
So this is Getting More by Stuart Diamond.
Yes. So brilliant book about negotiation. This was recommended to me by a friend of a friend before I went and started and studied got my MBA. So before I started business school, this friend and I connected because he was an alum from the university that I was about to attend. And he gave me a bunch of books to read and recommend. Actually, he sent me a care package, total stranger. He was a lovely man. Sent me a care package with all of these books. He think, these are the books that you should read before you start B school, and these will really help. And, sort of this is important knowledge. Anyway, Getting More by Stuart Diamond is a book about negotiation. And Stuart Diamond is a professor at Wharton Business School. And the thing that's so great about this book is that he talks about, he looks at negotiation in what I thought was a very broad and a very different way. And the whole idea behind the title, Getting More, is that every interaction you have with another human being, whether it's your child or your boss or the guy at the car mechanic or whatever it is a negotiation in some capacity. Because more often than not, that interaction is you want to get something or you want them to do something. And there's always going to be a bit of a back and forth. And the reason it's called Getting More is when you develop the skills to be a better negotiator, you won't always get what you want, but you will get more than you would have in the course of your lifetime than if you had just sort of winged it and continued to not practice some of the tools that he shares. So I love that idea. It's very honest. It's very practical. It's like, look, you're not always going to win, but trying these various things and doing it consistently will mean that over the course of your lifetime, you will get more.
Yeah. So is this a book that is this one of these books you go back to and you reread it occasionally to remind yourself of some
all
of
the time? I think I've reread it 3 times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to read it because I found. Have you ever read the book Never Split the Difference?
I haven't, but it does come up a lot. It's on my real books where my real books are in that pile. But I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, well, I'll probably read this book because that's quite a good book. That's by an FBI negotiator.
Yeah.
Again, I can't remember. I keep having to reread it because I can't remember these things.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a similar book.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get on to the next book.
Yay!
I wonder who this book is by. From CIA to CEO by Rupal Patel, which is you.
It is. Yes, it is.
So tell us a little bit. Well, start off by telling us about, or start telling us how you wrote the book in the first place. I mean, clearly it's probably based on real life, I guess,
Yes.
at least to some extent.
Yes.
So take us through how the book process started, and then maybe we could talk about the book after that.
Yeah. So the process started because, I've always written. I've always considered myself a writer, and I've always loved to write. And I had started many years ago a blog where it was, and then which evolved into a weekly newsletter that I would send out to my list of subscribers. And the whole intention behind what I was sharing was to take things that I was learning at the time, which was from building my own businesses and from just living and what I like to think of as a very thoughtful existence around, again, having a bigger picture and around our interconnectedness and not just thinking about business in a very sort of quantifiable way, but thinking about the bigger picture of how our careers and our lives piece together and the things that we learn from one area and all. So it was sort of a very big, broad view, but always with the intention of taking an insight or an aha moment that I had experienced in my own life, in my own business, in my own sort of career and personal life, and then bringing that lesson to a wider audience and sharing it in a way that would help them think about their own lives, their own careers, their own businesses in perhaps a slightly different way or a more expanded way or in a new way. And so the book evolved pretty naturally from that, in the sense that I found that, well, yes, I've got the audience of people who knows me and who subscribes to my newsletter, but I actually, for me, sort of having as big a positive impact on as many people as possible is really, really important. And so I thought, well, with a book, it can reach more people who don't know me. And, there's that beautiful thing of discovery, as, we shared earlier, where you walk into a bookshop and you're like, oh, that's an interesting title. Let me pick that up. And so that was sort of how that evolved. And to be honest, the book is literally for anyone. So anybody who wants to live more thoughtfully, live more in alignment with who they are and what they care about, as opposed to constantly shifting who they are or force-fitting themselves to fit a certain mold because of what other people tell them, of what society tells us we should do and what we should care about. And so it's all about living and leading as authentically and as powerfully as you possibly can, so that you can do the things and achieve the things that are important to you.
Okay, so let's talk about what is the big lesson that you learned from being in the CIA? Because it's pretty cool to say you were in the CIA. Yeah. I mean, you could have been doing filing there for 15 years, we don't know, but you're probably doing more important stuff than that. And what did you get? What did you suddenly appreciate you were missing in the CIA? Maybe I'm giving spoilers for your book, but what is in the CEO world that you gained from that you didn't have in the CIA, and vice versa?
Well, actually, I don't think it's anything I gained. I didn't have in the CIA that I gained as a CEO. It was actually, I brought so much of that CIA toolkit and that training with me as in my life as a CEO and as a leader, that I thought, wow, if this is true for me, then can I share these tools and lessons and tips with others who are, thinking about their careers in slightly different ways? So fundamentally, it's actually, like I said, universally applicable. But all of that is now my job is, well, how do I make you see that connection? How do I take something like, sort of situational awareness, which is a training that we had to develop while at the agency, and bring that into the more day-to-day world of, like I said, living and leading. And so it was, there was nothing that was missing. It's how am I using it in new ways? Yeah. So for example, one of the things I talk about in the book is this concept that I came up with called tactical ignorance. And by what I mean by that is this idea that, again, we are all bombarded with so much noise. And sometimes it's informational noise, sometimes it's emotional noise, sometimes it's sort of peer pressure noise, all of these things that we're all juggling and managing over time and in the moment. And the idea of tactical ignorance is to be able to separate the noise from what is truly important, so that you can do, again, what's important to you, show up in the way you need to show up and get the job done. So in a very, again, tangible, non-CIA way of using that, when people, for example, have a very important work meeting and they go in and they say, oh my gosh, I'm meeting with this person and they're so important and they've got all of this experience and all of this expertise, and I'm so low and they're so high. And again, all of this stuff that you just spin yourself into this tizzy of, and create this hierarchy, right, that exists where they're on a pedestal and you're just this lowly little person who's quavering in your boots kind of thing. And we psych ourselves out. So in that context, being tactically ignorant doesn't mean you ignore the context or what you're there to do. It means laser focusing on what the job is. My job is to go into this meeting and talk about this thing that I am an expert about, or that they wouldn't be calling you into the meeting, for example, just to be nice. They want you there for a reason, because you know something that they don't, or you have an idea that they don't, or whatever it is. So all of that other stuff, the atmospherics about rank and hierarchy and experience, etc., that's all noise. Tactically choose to ignore the noise and focus on the job. And that's where so people think ignorance is a bad thing, and it is, but being tactical about it is a really powerful thing. So choosing what you're ignoring, being very conscious of what you're ignoring is hugely empowering, because then you're focusing on what's important and not all of the other stuff.
Yeah, it's like somebody put a Facebook post saying they'd like to be able to say what they like on Facebook, but they don't feel they can. And I replied to them in the comments saying, like, well, it's like, is it something that's going to add value to your life to say, to be arguing with lots of random people on Facebook about an issue?
Yeah.
Or not? And usually the case is not. I mean, it's like you have your opinions and there are a time and a place to state them. But again, that is a classic example of where it's not even, it's not really tactical ignorance, but it is about this focus. Too many people get distracted by things, and it's like there's always stuff going on, especially now, all over the world.
I think a beautiful way of marrying that is, again, something else I talk about in the book a lot. It's about choosing your battles, right? Because I talk a lot about this idea about speaking truth to power. That was the unofficial motto at the CIA: speaking truth to power, not sugarcoating things. Not going in as like a bull in a china shop. But if when I'm talking to the president, or when I'm talking to a senator or a 4-star general, I have to tell them the truth based on what our best analysis and our best intelligence tells us, and not sugarcoat it and not tell them what they want to hear. But I have to choose my battles. So, there might be times when I need to push back on something really, really hard. There might be things, well, actually, it's a small point, and we sort of lose the battle to win the war, kind of thing. And so not everything you have to say is worth saying. Not everything you want to share is going to, as you suggested, is going to add any value. So it's important to have opinions. It's important to have an informed opinions, and it's important to have things you want to say, but not everything is worth the time, the energy, the effort, the potential blowback. And so choose your battles carefully.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the reason I was slightly distracted when you were first talking about this book is that I realized that I missed a book out. So I'm going to insert it in now.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is Influenced by Robert Cialdini. And the reason I missed this book out is I've got a spreadsheet, and I actually mentioned this on the first show as one of my book picks, because it's a fantastic book that I recommend to everybody. So I'll let you recommend it this time.
Yeah, so this was another one of those books that friend of a friend suggested or gifted to me before I started business school. And it was one of those books where I was like, wow, why isn't this mandatory reading? Because it takes I love popular psychology and this, sort of how our brains work and how, all of that stuff around sort of psychology that doesn't require a medical degree. And what I thought Bob Cialdini does brilliantly in this book is talks about the different levers of influence that we have, so one, you can use them to have positive influence in your own way, but also be attuned to when others are using these same things that he talks about to influence you. So little things he talks about, sort of the way we dress, right? People will, because of social construction, someone in a suit or in a uniform, people will just pay attention to them and let them influence their own behavior because they think that person has some sort of authority. Or again, positions of authority, people wearing lab coats. And they talk a lot about these experiments where, people will be in an experimental situation where they're pushing a button, and the person they think is the scientist in charge keeps telling them to push this button when they see that the button they're pushing is causing someone on the other side of the screen some serious distress. And because that person has an authoritative manner and they're in, science or a lab coat or whatever, good, normal people will cause total strangers undue harm, or what they think is undue harm, just because someone tells them to do it. And you think, oh my gosh, if this is something that happens in these totally superficial environments, when thankfully the repercussions aren't real, we need to all protect ourselves against it happening to us in the real world. So I think it's actually, and now just talking about it makes me want to read it again because
I've reread it about 2-3 times, and I think I think it might have an audio book actually, but I think I've got his ebook as well. I need to actually buy a paper copy so I can hold it up and say, buy this book. But it's such a good introduction to those kind of psychological. There's lots of other good psychological, psychological methods, I suppose.
Yeah, behavioral psychology, I think, is like how and again how people will manipulate it to get us to do things that they want us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, let me. Now I need to go back to where was it? But yes. So.
Oh.
And this book is The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver.
Yes. So Barbara Kingsolver is just a masterful storyteller. Yeah. And the first book I read by her was The Poisonwood Bible, where I read it again immediately after I put it down because I thought, how did she do that? As a writer myself, I was trying to understand how she wove a story from so many different perspectives in the way that she did. I didn't put that as a choice here, but because I think actually The Lacuna is in some ways better. And The Lacuna is, again, it's fiction. It's about this boy who grows up in the 1950s between Mexico and America. And, sort of it's historical fiction. So it weaves in real characters like in America, Joseph McCarthy, and, it's during the time of the Cold War, Frida Kahlo. And so it looks at how this boy, who's the main character, how history impacts his life in a really deep way that gets you. It's almost like a history lesson without you realizing it's a history lesson. And she talks a lot about communism or the fight against communism and how, in America, during the McCarthy era, during the Cold War, there was so much just, people selling each other out because they thought they were communists or labeling people that they didn't like as communists. These things that we hear about, that happened a lot during World War II, for example, happened also in the immediate aftermath because we were so worried about the threat of communism and in America and how it affects this boy's life in a really deep and personal way. So she has a beautiful story because she's an amazing storyteller, but I love the way she weaved in lessons about history and about things about, blind obedience and how politicians manipulate crowds and groupthink and the dangers of groupthink and that kind of thing in a way where she didn't preach to you, but you sure as hell got the message.
Yeah, I think this is the first fiction book you've written, you've picked on the list, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, that's it sounds very interlayered as a story, though. So yes. I always do. Well, I say I like a book with a theme. Sometimes if the theme is something I don't really agree with, then obviously. But I do like books to have some sort of message. And it's when it's well done. It's so good when a book has a message, but it has a decent story. It's not just like.
Well, and you don't realize there is a message until afterwards. You're like, oh wow, I just learned something, or it provoked something, and it's as you said, when it's well done, you don't even notice it's happening.
Yeah. Okay. We've got another book by the same author.
Oh.
You forgot what
I forgot I put this on the list. So yes, the Poisonwood Bible.
Yeah.
It was the reason that I fell in love with Barbara Kingsolver to begin with. And this one, as I said, it's just, she talks about this evangelical, I guess he's a priest, or not evangelical, what would you call it? Missionary. It's a missionary family. And I can't remember where they live, but it's the father who's this very, very strictly religious missionary who takes his wife and 4 daughters, on this mission. I think it's in the Congo. So they're in the remotest part of, I think the Congo, so don't quote me on this, but the remotest part of a very far away place from their home. And what happens and what unfolds with the locals within their own family and the father and the way he effectively rules the family with an iron fist and but the beauty of the way she writes is that because in this book, she changes the perspective of the character in each chapter. So you see what it's like to live in this place, to be in this family during this time as missionaries in a slightly hostile environment from the perspective of the 4 children. And you learn so much about the family, about, again, sort of the way religion is being used as a weapon, and about history and about just humanity in a way that it's heartbreaking and incredibly beautiful at the same time.
Okay, well, it sounds like a great book.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes. It's A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Oh,
Yanagihara.
Yeah.
So this book, I don't know how I got through it. It's an amazing book. So anytime anyone asks me for a fiction recommendation, this is the first book I recommend, because it is so powerfully written, and it is the most heartbreaking book that I have read maybe ever. But it is so, again, sort of like the Poisonwood Bible, incredibly beautiful. So it's got this really dark undertone to it. So generally, or superficially, it's the story about four friends that follows four male friends and follows their lives from soon after they graduate from university, and then as it follows them into their careers and into adulthood. And one of the characters, Jude, who's the main character, has this mysterious past and a very sort of slightly guarded and aloof nature. And over the course of the book, you learn more and more and more about just how ugly and dark and horrible his past is, and all of the things that happened to him, and the way he suffered at the hands of others. He's an orphan, and so it's just, and yet with, I mean, the most despicable, disgusting, horrifying, any negative adjective you can think of, things that happen to this poor human being, he becomes so, yes, he's scarred. I mean, literally in this case, scarred by them very deeply, but he doesn't let that own, and he's haunted by it, and it follows it through him throughout his life. But he creates this little life that is at points really beautiful and really powerful. And it is the one book that I still think about on a regular basis. I read it now, ironically, when I was on a beach holiday, and it was not beach holiday reading, but I read it maybe 7 years ago, and it still stays with me. Certain phrases stay with me, certain scenes stay with me. The characters are so vivid and so, again, beautifully written and real and honest and raw, and the relationships, it's one book that I think every human being should read. Yeah. One of a few, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like
or of 20.
Yeah. But would you say it's the emotional resonance of the book that is what appeals to you? Or
I think it was the story of how someone can suffer so much for so long and not be a total asshole, and not turn into a dark, disgusting, deranged human being themselves. So it shows you the resilience of the human spirit and the power of individuals, and how much we can endure and still move on and continue to live. And again, like I said, it follows him, it haunts him, it has left literal and physical scars on him, but he doesn't let that be the only thing that defines him. And he still becomes a very generous and a very loving person. And to be able to be capable of love despite all of that, I think is just one of, again, the most powerful things about the book.
Okay. Right.
Ooh.
And this is Constantine's Sword, The Church and the Jews by James Carroll. So
this was another one of those. I saw it on a table at Barnes & Noble, and I read the back, and I thought, I need to read this book. So the premise of the book, so James Carroll is a either current or former priest, Catholic priest, and he looks at the history of the formation of the Catholic Church and then sort of later Christianity, and how at every stage, and I'm sorry, Tim, we're going to get a little bit political again, but at every stage in the church's evolution, decisions were made about which books do we keep as part of the canon and which do we ignore, which, how are we going to sort of paint the Jews, for example, and their relationship to Jesus, and how are we going to, and what are the things that we're going to forget? One of the most powerful things that I took from that book was, and so he talks about these decision points, these turning points over the evolution of the early church and then later on, and how almost inevitably those decisions directly allowed for something like the Holocaust to happen. And so one of the most powerful takeaways for me, and again, this is a book that I've read probably closer to 15 years ago, was, he talks about the symbol of the church is the cross. which is all about Jesus's death and suffering. And yet, and that was a choice. So that was the symbol they chose because they wanted the focus to be on death and suffering. And yet, if you believe that the Bible is true, Jesus's life was all about forgiveness, about kindness, about turning the other cheek, about loving each other. It was about love and about universality as opposed to death and suffering, and about resurrection, right? And so the fact that the church chose the dark part, the ugly part, to make the symbol says a lot in and of itself. And then again, so the way, sort of Jews were portrayed, well, like, hey, newsflash, Jesus was a Jew, right? And yet, and it was the Romans who killed Jesus, not the Jews. Yeah. And yet so many of these little nuances slip over time or are intentionally downplayed over time. And even things like, which books do we put in sort of the main canon of the Bible? It was a choice. There were so many people alive at the time who claimed that they're, making faithful account of what happened. Well, some books just didn't get into the final version. And some books that showed perhaps, for example, women having different roles in the church and having leadership positions and having relationships with, sort of asexual relationships with Jesus were left out, again, very consciously. So it reminded me that all religion is constructed and that the people at various times who are part of the process of constructing it are making choices about what we're keeping, what we're not, what we're focusing on, and what we're not. And the fact that he's a priest himself talking about it, I think, gives it a lot of credence. So it's not someone who's, sort of trying to bring down the church or never believed and all of these things. It's, he's an insider and he's looking at it from a historical point of view. And I thought that was, it was really interesting.
Yeah, it sounds interesting, really. It's like we're going progressively further and further back in history, aren't we? Though I think that might be the last history one. I'm not sure. I'm looking down the list. Yeah, I think we might. Oh, well, there's one sort of famous, more historical book, but I think that might be the last of. So I think we're just going back to about the early church in history, and we're not going back any further.
Okay.
Anyway.
Oh, yes.
It's the Slough House Thriller series, books 1 to 6. I think this has been recommended by other people, but only the first book. So you can recommend the whole series.
All of them. Well, I mean, they're all, sort of just iterations of the first, right? They're just different stories that are just as fast-paced and interesting. But so I read the first Slough House book because someone in Waterstones recommended it to me. And I just said, well, I like thrillers. I like a lot of things. What do you think is a good one? She's like, well, this one's been really popular recently. So I read the first one and then I bought the second and then the third. I mean, it was one of those things that I just devoured as soon as they were available and, pre-ordered the next one before it was out, because Mick Herron does a brilliant job of, again, character development, plot twist stories, but he doesn't take the path like the James Bond path, like, all spies are these sexy, fast-paced lives where they're driving Aston Martins. He takes the opposite tack and is like, hey, here's a group of people who were rejected from MI5 for political reasons or internal reasons. And this is what happens in their careers and in their lives and how they get sucked into the bigger picture and politics and all of this kind of stuff. But they're just really good, easy reads. And they've been made into a series now on Apple, I think, Apple TV, where Gary Oldman is one of the main characters, which I think I sort of disagree with because anyway, that's a separate story. But, I'm the type of person who I can't watch a show of a book I've read because in my head,
you've imagined individual actors, haven't you? And it's
not even actors. The way I pictured whoever the character is just never. They're never faithfully represented the way they are in my imagination. And Gary Oldman is not, as disgusting, I think, as sort of one of the main protagonists in Slough House. But they're just good, easy, but really, just good reads.
And do you have to read them all? Like, are they in order? They don't make sense.
I mean, they could stand alone, but they talk about things that happened in the past and characters that were in previous books that are, so you don't need it. You'll still be able to keep up. But I would say if you're going to read them in order.
Yeah. Okay. And it's the Chillpreneur, the new rules for creating success, freedom, and abundance on your terms by Denise Duffield-Thomas. I'm not sure why abbreviated some titles, not others, but that has to be one of the longest.
Yes. So it's just, I mean, the author refers to it as Chillpreneur. You can leave the rest, but it was the first book. So this woman, Denise Duffield-Thomas, is an Aussie woman who does a lot of work helping women with their money mindset. And before I encountered her, I had no idea that there was even this concept called money mindset. And very briefly, it's the reality that all of us have a relationship with money and a relationship with how that translates into how we value ourselves, how much we think we can earn, how we spend, how we save, all of these things. And by working on your money mindset, you can change the reality of your wealth. It's not that simple. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in between, but it was the first time I had heard of this concept, and it was the first time, and then just reading some of her other work, her blogs, she does a lot of webinars and things. I just thought, wow, this woman's amazing. I'd never had thought about these things in this way. And what I loved about Chillpreneur is that, it was such a nice antidote to this idea of, again, hustle culture. And to be an entrepreneur, you have to, sort of literally give your blood, sweat, and tears, and 200 hours a week of your life, and everything else has to fall to the wayside, and blah, blah, blah. And her message is, look, that's only possible if that's all you care about. And two, if you've got a family, that's not real. And especially, yes, maybe if you're a man who's got a family, that's real, because the assumption still in even Western societies is that the woman the woman in the relationship is going to do all of this stuff to take care of you and enable that hustle culture. But she's a woman, and she's saying, look, she is a millionaire, multi-millionaire. She didn't succumb to that hustle culture to do it. And she was still able to maintain her sanity and her relationships with her family. And so there is another way. And I thought that was such a beautiful counterpoint to so much of the nonsense that we hear in popular culture. And also just a calling out of hey, the only reason that hustle culture can exist and persist is because there are a lot of women doing all of the work in the background around childcare, or home stuff or whatever else. And hey, let's call bullshit on this. And again, have a different way.
Yeah. I think there's probably too many books that describe the opposite kind of thing. And also, I was saying this to somebody at a conference I was at the other day, which I won't mention because I'm not supposed to promote random stuff here, but there's too many people who write books about they were successful, but they don't know why they were successful. And I think that's where a lot of the hustle culture comes from. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be working 1 hour a week or whatever, but you want to have some balance in your life, I think.
Well, and also, again, I think most business books are written by men for men. And they act as if every other reality in your home, in your relationships, and anything else outside of the office or outside of the garage, if it's a startup, doesn't exist. Well, who's taking care of that, right? I mean, there's a total ignoring of it. And I think what's beautiful is look, this is a reality. And the only reason you had the luxury of being that successful is because other people were taking care of your shit. So let's be real about it. And let's acknowledge that there can be another way where everything doesn't have to fall to the wayside. And oh, by the way, women can, be just as successful with and offering a different paradigm to success.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good for everybody, whatever your sector is. Paradigm.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah.
The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. I think it's Doidge.
Yeah. So this was another, saw it on the book table, picked it up, love the back. So it's all about neuroplasticity. And this I read, probably, again, close to 15 years ago. And the idea of neuroplasticity is actually our brain can change itself through training, through various forms of different stimulation and blah, 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 blah. And he looks at, so I think he's a doctor, and he looks at all of the most recent at the time studies in neuroscience that actually showed that even with people with brain damage, even with people who had parts of their brain removed, even with people who suffer from chronic conditions later in life, like Alzheimer's, can make real and significant improvements by certain types of training. And so this previous idea that, your brain starts to die after a certain age. You can't make new connections. You can't create new brain cells. Actually, they proved all of that is wrong, and that the brain is incredibly adaptive at creating new wirings and new connections if it's being stimulated in the right way. And so I just found that really compelling. And I remember reading it when I was in my early 20s, thinking, gosh, if I ever suffer from Alzheimer's, I want to make sure that whoever is in charge of my care reads this book and make sure that I get, this type of care, because it's incredible. I mean, I think we forget how amazing our bodies are and how much they can adapt. And this book was a huge eye opener.
Yeah, well, I know my late wife had a stroke, and she was her brain was severely affected, but she recovered a significant amount. She died of other things eventually, but so yeah, it's so true. And the consensus thinking was always like your brain was just the way it is, sort of thing. If you have any sort of brain, but actually, I think you're right. I think this sounds like a book that's representing the modern way of thinking rather than.
Well, it's not just the modern way of thinking. It's proven by research. So that's the other thing. It's not like, oh, it was just a great idea, I wish it were true. It's like, oh, wow, look at all these case studies.
Yeah. So we all need to read the book and find out what exercises we need to do to stave off Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever. Okay. The next book is The Art of Exceptional Living by Jim Rohn. So
I've only listened to, and it's not that there's an audio version. I think there's a book with this title that is only an audio. So because it's a compilation of some workshops that he did, and he often refers in the audio actually to when you're listening to this tape. So you can tell it's quite dated. But the thing that I love about, so he has a very unique delivery and a very unique voice that for me, I found took a while to get over because the content is so good. It is, for me, one of the best personal development resources out there. And he talks about the whole picture. So not just, he talks about wealth, he talks about relationships, he talks about, the art of exceptional living, about living with style, about being a person of substance, and just these human lessons that I think are so again, universal and really, really powerfully told through, again, his case studies, his examples, and sort of the phrases he uses. And it's one of those audios that I have listened to probably at this point, maybe 6 or 7 times. And every time I get another thing from it. Every time I think, oh, wow, this is another big sort of takeaway that I can implement in my life. So yeah, I can't say enough good about it.
So was there one particular thing that resonated that if you had to pick one, or do you not want to spoil the book for people?
I think so. Yeah, well, it's not what it's one of many things, but the one that's I'm just remembering now is he talks about this mentor that he had that helped him sort of develop some of these skills or gave him some of these tips and lessons that he then shares with the rest of us. And one of the things is this idea about growing as an individual. So we all, we think about, oh, well, I want to make more money. I want to do this. I want to have this. I want to achieve that. But you can't have any of those things if you don't grow. So in order to make more money, you have to become more valuable. You have to develop skills or resources or change your mindset, whatever it is. And there's this great sort of dialogue between the two of them where it's like, don't wish for fewer problems. Wish you had more ideas. Don't wish that things were easier. Wish that you were better, and it's true. We all have, not all, but, at least here in the West or wherever, you consider your community, we've got access to a lot of resources, and everybody, well, again, let's put some politics aside to differing degrees, but many of us have access to a lot of the same thing. And yet some people will take, and the way he puts it, the same seed, sand, soil, sunshine, and rain and create a garden. And other people will just be constantly bitching and moaning about, oh, well, we only got one summer and I want all summer and no winter and that kind of thing. And so he uses these great sort of frames of reference and metaphors to make really profound points. But those are the ones I loved. It's like, you can't curse everything because that's all you've got. So you can't complain about taxes, about the government, about the politicians, about prices, because literally that's all you have to work with. So if that's your reality, instead of cursing all of it, learn how to work with it. You be better. You learn more. You grow and adapt and change so that you can make a garden from those same tools.
Yeah. Well, I think there is a certain elements of tactical ignorance there as well, isn't
Yeah,
it?
for sure. Yeah.
It's like the government may well be coming after all your money, and I'm sure they will be, but right now it's not your main concern, and it's not something you should really care about. So,
yeah. And again, focus on what you can control, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't control the government or what they do with taxes. So what can you control, and what can
Yeah.
you do with it?
Okay, talking about control, let's go on to the next book,
Yay!
which is The Murder Club by Richard Osman, who I think is the also the person who does the Pointless game
Yes, he
show.
does. He's brilliant. So I'd only ever seen
Yeah.
him on Pointless, and I thought he was just some sort of bit, side character or whatever, because I don't know as much about British culture as I should probably. He's a phenomenal writer, and the Thursday Murder Club was one of those hard copy books. Oh no, sorry, it was a Kindle book that I got, and I was literally reading it in public, not just laughing out loud, guffawing out loud. Like his turns of phrase, the way he kept. So it's really strange because he's this middle-aged man, and the most vivid character. Well, they're all pretty vivid, but he creates dialogue between old age pensioners, people in their 70s and 80s, and two of the main characters are women, and actually the narrator is a woman, and you think, how did you nail that? How did you nail that voice? And my mother-in-law, who has read the book as well, who is an old age pensioner in her 80s, she's like, that is how we talk. That's such an accurate reflection. So his command of, he's just got such a good ear, I guess, and maybe he's sort of around older people or whatever, but it's brilliant. It's hysterically funny. He's so witty. It's charming. It's interesting because it is a murder mystery, but I devoured that first one, again guffawing my way through it. Very quickly pre-ordered the next one, got my way through it, and have now pre-ordered the third. I mean, you can't go wrong. It's light, it's humorous. It was one of those things during the dark days of lockdown. I was asking a friend, like, I just need some light mind candy that, and what do you got for me? And this was what she recommended, and I'm so glad I read it. It's brilliant.
So is it a murder mystery, or is it more just sort of descriptive book?
No, it's a murder mystery. So basically, it ends up being that this group of 4 or 5 retirees at their retirement home, there are deaths in and around their little community, their retirement community, and they help the police solve them. It's brilliant.
Oh, okay. It sounds like it. It sounds like one of the books I might rush out and buy at some point.
You should.
When I go through all the other books I've got to get through.
Well, there's that.
A big pile of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Ooh, yes.
It's The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I think it's Dumas, isn't it? Certainly could be pronounced other ways or worse.
Well, I mean, the French, I guess, would say Dumas, but yeah, I've always said Dumas. Such a good damn book, and worth carrying this weight around you. I mean, it's a thick old book, but this also came recommended to me by a friend. I had never read any Dumas, and I can't remember why I'd asked her about him, but she's like, oh, you must read The Count of Monte Cristo, and I was like, oh, but isn't he he's the guy who wrote The Three Musketeers and all of that frivolous stuff? And she's like, no. She's like, Rupal, this is a book about revenge. And I was like, oh, this speaks to me. This is a really, let's see what this is all about. And so after she recommended it to me, sorry, I'm just going to put some more juice into my computer while we talk. When she recommended it to me and I got into it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful. So basically the premise of the book is there's this man who is wrongfully accused of something and basically imprisoned for however many years, and then spends the rest of his lifetime getting revenge on the people who put him there and abandoned him and left him to basically die in prison. It is so good. I mean, it is that, and after having read it, actually, I then very quickly went and I was like, oh, well, I think a lot more of Alexandre Dumas now, so I'm going to read some of his other work, which I did, and I haven't been disappointed. But if you read nothing else by this man, it's got to be this book. It is, it's so good.
Yeah, that's certainly, I had a little phase in my 30s where I felt so bad for not having read lots of, because I wasn't somebody who ever really read a lot. So I read a lot of classic books, but I never got around to reading this. So this is definitely one I need to read.
Yeah, move up the list.
Yeah, move up the list. Yeah. Right. So we've now finished the books, but we have one item left.
Okay.
Where purely so I can hope to get some vague high affiliate income for once. I have the Amazon Dream List pick where I ask our esteemed guest what they would have picked. So if I can hopefully get this working properly. Screen. I think this hung up the last time I tried it. I managed to.
Oh no.
Yeah, I managed to hang up my entire. So hopefully we can see a rectangular size bed. Yes, there we go. That looks
well.
right.
So it's not the bed; it's the headboard.
Oh, the headboard.
Yeah. And so it was a tough one. This actually, when you sort of asked me to choose something, because I don't mean to sound, and I'm not saying this in like I'm holier than thou in any capacity, but I just don't think about stuff like. And it was like, oh gosh, well, should I pick something big ticket? And then actually on Amazon, there's actually not that many big ticket items. Anyway, if Elon Musk did want to gift me this headboard, I would definitely say yes. And the reason I picked this is because I am trying to be a more conscious consumer, and furniture is one of those things that we've gotten so used to, relatively affordable, mass-produced furniture. And I thought, now that I'm an adult and I'm thinking about, I am in the process of furnishing my home. Furniture has been one of those things where it's like, it would be nice to know that this was made by a human being. And in some cases, yes, I will go for the mass produced, but in other cases, it'd be nice to support an actual artisan, because I think artisans and craftsmen and women are a dying breed, and I want to make sure that these things that they can do don't die. And so anyway, this is a beautiful hand-carved teak headboard, and I think the seller is a woman based in Thailand or somewhere in Southeast Asia. And it just, I saw this and I thought, oh my God, this is stunning. To me, it seems a steal at $300 or whatever it is. But it was for those reasons. It's sort of reminding myself that like everything doesn't have to be cheap and everything doesn't have to be sort of quick and, whatever, and customizable. There is something to be said for supporting artisans and craftspeople. And in this case, it's somewhere else in the world, fine. But wherever they are, I would love to be able to go to a workshop and see the person building my headboard or my dining table or whatever else. And so that's why I chose this.
So you like the kind of going back more to connection with the original sort of artisan rather than something that's been sitting in a warehouse for 6 years.
Look, I want to be realistic about it, right? Because there are economic considerations where, I can't sadly afford to have everything in my home custom made for me or whatever. But it also, I think, again, choose your battles, right? For me, it's when I can support someone who's a real human being working in their workshop, I'd rather do that than buy something mass produced. Not because there's no value judgment. It's more just because I do think a lot of crafts and a lot of arts will die because the people who practice them just can't afford to continue to practice them. So whenever I possibly can, I would like to be a part of the solution of keeping that history, that heritage, that skill alive in some way.
Yeah. Right. So let's flip back to this. And I've started to ask this rather cruel question to the guests at the end of the show. If you had to pick one of these books to give to somebody, which one would you pick?
Oh, that is a cruel one. Gosh, I would say it would depend on, well, it's going to be that annoying answer. It depends. So I will say if it was just sort of a toolkit for life, then I would choose Influence for the reasons I shared earlier, where it's really good to not be a victim in that way. And it's a really valuable skill set for life to be able to know when people are manipulating them and not let yourself be manipulated.
Yeah, it's like, this is where I managed to scroll the entire Amazon Live app off my phone for a second. I was like, oh, that's not worked. Well, trying to get back. Well, anyway, people can find Influence if they want to.
Of course they can. They'll find it. Yeah.
So the other question I like to ask guests, obviously, because you're a writer, is
Yes.
have you got any book lined up, a new book or a new project to write, a writing project to work on that you're thinking about doing?
I do. I feel in my core that I'm at least have 2 more books in me.
Yeah.
The next one is still sort of taking form and shape here, but it's going to be nominally, and again, the specifics I'm still coming to terms with or trying to figure out where to focus it, but it's going to be about just rethinking our relationship with or how we integrate work into our lives and our lives into work, and rethinking what the future of work looks like that book will be more from a woman's perspective, in the sense of I still think a lot of progress around equality and representation and women in leadership, we're so far behind. Granted, we haven't really started until relatively recently, so fair enough to us as humans, go us, but there's still so much work to be done on that topic in particular. And I still see far too many women being forced or socially pressured or familially pressured to take a back seat, to not care about their careers or their ambitions. And again, I want to be a part of the solution to that. So yeah, around sort of making sure that women aren't always the ones who are sacrificing their ambitions and their dreams in order to help the human race continue on.
Yeah. Okay. So is that both of your future books that you think there was?
No, so that's one. Yeah. The second one, I think, again, is loosely going to be around my family, and not in a sort of autobiographical way, but I am lucky to come from a very wonderful family of learners, of change makers, of people who see a problem and want to fix it, of people who fought for things that they cared about, progress and education and all of these things. And I've learned so much from living in that world and growing up in that environment. And there have been so many just little lessons or little sayings that would come up again and again that I think, again, have universal application and universal resonance. And so it's in a way, how can I bring all of that I benefited from to the world in a way that will be relevant for readers who didn't grow up in my family.
Yeah. Okay. So let's close off by, we shouldn't really do this because you're not supposed to send anybody, but let's say somebody was really interested in you and your books. How can they get into contact with you and find out about?
Very simply on my website, which is rupalpatel.com.
Oh, okay. So it's the name with a Y in the middle of it.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Is that your middle initial, or is that just because there are lots of Rupal Patels?
No, that is my middle initial.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.